The soda splashed across Mia's jacket, the ice-cold syrup dripping onto the dirt as laughter erupted around her. Jake stood there, sneering, camera in hand, certain he had humiliated the quiet twins once and for all. But then, without a word, Darius moved, faster than anyone could follow, and in a blink, Jake was screaming on the ground, clutching his wrist. What happened next shattered the entire school's social order and exposed a secret no one was prepared for. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Darius and Mia Carter paused at the front entrance of Brookstone High, their sneakers rooted to the slick tile as the swell of voices inside the building seemed to press against the glass. Twin reflections stared back at them in the door, proud, dark-skinned teenagers carrying the weight of unfamiliarity on their shoulders. Their mother's deployment orders had come swiftly, as military life often demanded, leaving them little time to mourn the friendships and memories torn from their old life. Here, in this stiff, gray-toned town, the rules were different. And they felt it before the first bell ever rang. Their entrance was met with silence, sharpened by stares. In a school where sameness was the norm, their very existence became an unspoken challenge. As Darius and Mia walked through the hall, the small, cruel details accumulated. The half-hidden smirks, the deliberate shifts away from them in the lunch line, the whispers that died just as they passed. It was subtle at first, wrapped in a false politeness that felt more cutting than any open insult. But Brookstone didn't stay subtle for long. Jake Morris was the crown prince of this social order, a senior with the swagger of someone who had never known real consequences. His father's shadow loomed large over the town. The Morris family name was stitched into the local country club, the mayor's re-election campaign, even the school's new football field. Jake wore that legacy like armor, a badge that excused every cruel impulse lurking beneath his easy grin. When he spotted Darius and Mia standing quietly by the lockers that first morning, Jake's smirk sharpened into something uglier. He leaned into the shoulder of his grinning sidekick, Travis, and said, with a volume clearly intended to carry across the hall, "Looks like the janitors brought their kids to work." Laughter burst from his friends like a reflex, loud and hollow. Darius caught the way Mia's jaw tensed, the tiny flicker of anger she struggled to suppress. He matched her silence with his own, feeling the discipline drilled into them from endless hours on the mat, the teachings of their father echoing in his mind. Control is strength. React, and you give them power. Wait, and you decide when it ends. But Brookstone wasn't a place that allowed dignity to go unpunished. It wasn't long before the low-level snipes turned into something more targeted. Scribbled notes wedged into their lockers reeked of old hatred masked as crude jokes. "Go back to the jungle." Their shoes vanished mysteriously from gym class benches. Shoulder checks in the hallway became a daily ritual, each bump a deliberate reminder. You don't belong here. Word spread fast among the student body. Jake had plans, bigger ones. Plans that involved humiliation, public, unforgettable. And as the twins pushed through each day with heads high and hearts heavy, a storm quietly gathered on the horizon, one they could feel coming with the same certainty they felt in the tightening of their fists and the steadying of their breath. Their silence was mistaken for fear. Their restraint was mistaken for weakness. Brookstone High had made a terrible assumption, and it was going to cost them. The sharp bite of late autumn hung in the air, but the energy on Brookstone High's football field was electric, vibrating with the chaotic pulse of 1,000 restless teenagers. The outdoor pep rally was supposed to be a celebration. Team banners fluttered on the chain-link fences, the brass section blared a tuneless anthem into the sky, and cheerleaders twirled in forced, glittering smiles. Darius and Mia Carter stood apart from it all, two still figures in a swirling sea of noise. Their posture was rigid, their eyes wary. Experience had taught them to read the crowd, and today, the air crackled with something sharper than excitement, It was the feeling predators gave off just before a strike. Jake Morris spotted them instantly, his lips curling into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Flanked by his usual entourage, Travis, Ben, and Logan, Jake leaned in, murmuring low enough for only his group to hear, but with the unmistakable lilt of cruelty. "Time for a little entertainment." Without warning, Jake vaulted from the bleachers, swaggering across the field like a prize fighter entering the ring. Students parted around him, sensing something about to unfold, their curiosity outweighing their conscience. "Hey everyone, watch this!" Jake bellowed, his voice slicing through the thrum of the rally. All heads turned. Darius and Mia stood their ground. They had faced worse. They had been taught that no one could strip away their dignity unless they handed it over willingly. But Jake was never one to leave anything to chance. With a theatrical stumble, he hurled the contents of a supersized soda cup across Mia's chest. The cold liquid splattered across her jacket, darkening the fabric in jagged streaks. "Oops," Jake drawled with mock innocence, cocking his head like a scolded child. "Didn't see you there, ninja girl." The laughter started in small bursts, but quickly grew into a contagious, ugly roar. A chorus of cheap amusement at someone else's degradation. Mia froze. Every fiber in her body screamed for release. Her fists clenched so hard her nails bit crescents into her palms. It wasn't just the sticky cold of the soda seeping into her clothes. It was the humiliation, the deliberate stripping of her humanity, broadcast like a spectacle. Darius, standing an arm's length away, caught her wrist in a firm grip. A silent tether back to discipline, back to the lessons burned into their bones. Hold the line, choose your moment. Not here, not yet. But Jake wasn't finished. Pulling out his phone with a flourish, he shoved it in their faces, the camera lens a smug, unblinking eye. "Smile for the camera, Tarzans," he barked. The words landed like a slap. The crowd's laughter faltered, splintered into uncomfortable murmurs. Even among the ones who laughed, something twisted inside, some primal recognition that a line had been crossed. A girl near the front bit her lip and looked away. One of the football players shifted uncomfortably, his sneakers scraping the pavement, but no one moved to intervene. No teachers stepped forward. No friends spoke up. In that suspended moment, time seemed to stretch thin, vibrating like a wire pulled too tight. Inside the twins, something broke. Not loudly, not with a roar. It broke quietly, like a dam cracking beneath unbearable pressure. The silent, inevitable prelude to a flood. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because the world had just changed, and Jake Morris didn't even know it yet. The world seemed to contract into a single breath, the kind held between lightning and thunder. Darius lowered his voice, his lips barely moving. "Now?" Mia's reply was immediate, her gaze locked on Jake's smug, leering face. Now. In that instant, time snapped back into motion. Jake didn't even register the shift before Darius sidestepped, his body moving with a lethal grace born from years of relentless training. In one fluid, practiced motion, Darius seized Jake's wrist, twisted it sharply, and sent the phone clattering to the ground. Jake yelped, a high, helpless sound that shattered whatever illusions of control he still clung to. The crowd inhaled collectively, a sharp, brittle gasp. Jake's crew surged forward like panicked cattle, two of them barreling toward Mia with clumsy aggression. Mia didn't retreat. She flowed into the attack, her movement seamless and precise. She ducked low, one leg sweeping outward in a tight, perfect arc, and the two boys tumbled over her, their momentum carrying them head first into the thick, wet mud lining the edge of the field. The laughter was gone, replaced by stunned silence. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face a mottled crimson, veins bulging at his temples. "You think you're tough, boy?" he screamed, voice cracking with panic. He charged, wild and reckless. Darius stood firm, calculating every step, every breath. At the last second, Darius pivoted. His body blurred with speed and control, and he delivered a precise counter. A sidestep, a palm strike to the chest to redirect Jake's weight, and finally, a sweeping kick that caught Jake's legs mid-charge. Jake's body lifted into the air and slammed against the cold ground with a sickening thud. He lay there, gasping like a fish out of water, staring up at the gray, indifferent sky. Nobody laughed now. One of Jake's remaining friends, spurred by desperation, lunged at Mia from the side. Mia didn't flinch. She caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted her hips, and with a deceptively gentle shove, flipped him over her shoulder. He landed flat on his back, groaning, staring up at her in dazed terror. It wasn't a brawl. It wasn't chaos. It was a demonstration. A lesson carved into muscle and instinct, taught with flawless discipline. The students ringed around them, stood motionless, caught between awe and disbelief. These weren't the quiet, awkward kids they had ignored or mocked. These were something else entirely. Something controlled, powerful, and terrifyingly beautiful in their precision. From the edge of the field, Principal Warren stormed forward, his silver hair disheveled, his voice cutting across the stunned silence. "Enough," he barked, shoving his way into the center. Jake, breathless, humiliated, staggered to his feet, desperation sharpening his tongue. "They attacked me," he cried, voice cracking, flinging a trembling finger at the twins. Principal Warren's cold gaze pinned him in place. "No, Jake," he said, his voice like iron wrapped in ice. "They defended themselves, and you'll be explaining this to the school board and to the police." The words hung heavy in the winter air. No rescue was coming. No excuses would save him. The dragons had awakened, and justice had arrived, swift and undeniable. The office smelled of old books and varnished wood, a place meant to project authority. But today, Principal Warren sat behind his desk like a man burdened by shame rather than power. Darius and Mia sat across from him, their bodies tense but composed, still carrying the weight of the battlefield that the schoolyard had become just hours before. Warren cleared his throat, a rough sound in the heavy silence. His hands, calloused and weathered, folded tightly on the desk as if anchoring himself for what he had to say. "No student should have to face what you faced here," he said finally, voice gravelly with unspoken regret. "And we're going to make this right." There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncements, just the raw acknowledgement of wrongs too long ignored. For once, the authority figure didn't demand apologies or explanations from the victims. For once, the system bent not against them, but for them. By the time the twins walked out of the office, the school had already begun to change. The story of the confrontation spread like gasoline over dry grass. First whispered among friends, then shouted across hallways, posted online before the last bell even rang. No filters, no spin. Just the raw footage of Jake's humiliation and the breathtaking control Darius and Mia had wielded. Not out of rage, but with honor. Parents flooded the school's phone lines that night, their outrage echoing louder than any rally. Meetings were demanded. Suspension forms were signed. Jake Morris, once untouchable, found himself exiled, not because he had lost a fight, but because he had been unmasked. The golden boy was revealed as a bully, a coward, and worst of all, a disgrace to the image the town had so carefully cultivated. Anonymous letters began appearing in the twins' mailbox. Notes scrawled in shaky handwriting thanking them, applauding them, apologizing for years of silent complicity. Some came from students they barely knew. Some from teachers too cautious to speak publicly. Some from alumni who remembered all too well what it felt like to stand alone. The halls that had once swallowed Darius and Mia in indifference now parted for them with open respect. High fives, fist bumps, nods of acknowledgement replaced the sidelong glances and whispered jeers. They hadn't just won a fight. They had shifted the entire gravity of Brookstone High. As the twins sat quietly on the battered school bus that afternoon, the low rumble of the engine blending with the orange glow of the setting sun, Mia leaned her head against the window, her voice soft but sure. "Dad was right." Darius smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the fiery horizon stretching out beyond the rows of leafless trees. "True strength isn't about showing off," he said. "It's about standing tall when it matters most." The bus bumped along the road, carrying them forward into a future subtly, irrevocably changed. They hadn't just survived Brookstone High, they had redefined it. And in that quiet, steadfast way, the kind that didn't need applause or banners, justice had finally found its champions.